Chapter 21, A Powerhouse of Existence. There were many questions I would have asked Mian as we went along, but felt instinctively that it would be useless. As he had advised, let perception be your teacher, therefore I was acting in accordance, in so far as I could. All about me the air was charged with moving beings, going ever onward, some going swiftly, while others plodded along as though their burdens had not been sufficiently lightened for the requirements of the journey. While noting all this, I discovered that I could see back of me, to the right, or to the left, as easily as I could in front, as though my body saw as well as my eyes. This strange new faculty of observation gradually increased my scope of vision. Far out beyond the red-fringed darkness, I could see light, in which rainbows seemed to play, pale as the dawn, of a grey weird loveliness, coming and going as though flirting with the darkness, for to embrace it would be to destroy. For delicate beauty, it seemed I had never seen anything more fascinating, or alluring, than this kiss of the dawn and the darkness in the soul world. It was like life kissing death. Goodbye. With this mystical and lovely dawn of another world upon me, I lost in the witchery of it. We landed suddenly on what had every appearance of being an earth. There were houses, flowers, trees, everything was so lifelike it amazed me. I almost fancied I had returned to earth. The light was dim as of the dawn and a cool peaceful gentleness permeated everything, as the inhabitants moved about in a free, easy and unrestrained way. They conversed with me, as though they considered me a spirit of the higher world, asking me questions of a life to come, as we might, of one who comes from the realms beyond the earth. They were full of faith, love and certainty as to an afterlife, and seemed spiritually far in advance of the earth, yet, they were perfectly familiar with earth life and its conditions, evidently having lived on earth. Nor were they entirely free from the magnetism of earth interests, as I saw some going earthward, as though drawn by something of paramount importance. They would dive, as it were, quickly and easily, into the red darkness, and gradually become one with its redness. While there seemed no doubt that these people once inhabited the earth, I saw no one I had ever known in this life. They had possibly progressed there, out of the darkness, and would go back to help those, less fortunate, into the higher condition, which they had attained. As I wondered at it all, the dimness of the soft, silvery light and other things which I did not understand, a voice came.
To eyes grown accustomed to the darkness, this light is brilliant.
It is beautiful, very beautiful, I said, as the admitted mercy of its softness, added to its loveliness, held me in mystic dreaminess, until the command to come called me beyond its environment, and I went wondering, and I am still wondering. For my own convenience, I called this place of existence the dawn world, for so it seemed, as it was there the light began to neutralize the darkness, for those whose nights had been very long and whose dreams had been bad. As we vibrated onward in the ever-increasing light, passing silent shadow cities under the radiance of great orbs, we seemed to be riding on the very air, in company with countless thousands, everything vibrating onward in perpetual motion. So enchanting was this riding on vibratory waves of space, not entirely unlike those of the sea, in a gentle undulatory way, that I felt like going on forever, and forever, never tiring, never stopping but, after abandoning myself to the witchery of it for some time, I perceived the vibrations changing, merging into a quivering sensation, even more exquisite, and then, as if a part of it, my feet came upon something different, something firm and reliable, as one treads upon the void and finds the rock beneath. Wonderful was the sight that met my enraptured gaze. A city of light and of whiteness, boundless in expanse. I walked in this place, very much as I had on earth, for it seemed I had reached the limit of my ability to float in space. It seemed that I was heavier than my surroundings in some way. Everywhere were the most exalted souls I had yet seen. Some came forward and greeted us, addressing Mian as though he were one of them, and then, together, we entered into a building immeasurable in space and height, the veritable soul of architectural magnificence. The material had the transparency of glass of a variegated whiteness, into which colors, harmonizing in the most delicate way, were coming and going, ever changing. Electricity seemed to be the power which held it all together, as the electric blue would merge into violet and play incessantly, in a serpentine way, into which, almost imperceptible yellowish streams seemed to flow. It was self-illuminated. This is not a very accurate description, but really I am not master of the words that it requires, so we will just have to let it go at that, with the hope that someday, when we are more familiar with such matters, some enterprising person will compile a dictionary, for the convenience of those who will write describing our future homes. The floor was even more transparent, with less color, and vibrated as the beating of a pulse. Treading upon it sent strange thrills through my entire body, as though harmonizing the body with its magnetism. At first this was not altogether a pleasant sensation, but after getting into harmony with it, all mysteries seemed dissolved. The very atmosphere exuded knowledge, free and flowing for the mentality to feed upon, as there is only the mentality to sustain, just as in the earth life, air is free and flowing to give breath to the physical body. It seemed that all the wisdom, of all the ages, was mine as I stood there. Life and death gave up their mysteries, and I no longer wondered, but observed as one who understood. The machinery of earth existence was operated, and regulated, by and through the power of this plane. It was actually in contact with the earth. No happening on earth escaped the observation of the great spirits, who seemed to have nothing else to do, but watch over the beings of earth, to teach them, to lift them up, to protect and help them up through the darkness, watch over reincarnations, create teachers, and place them where they were most needed. With these teachers, they were in direct communication at all times, and knew exactly what was going on through some form of wireless telegraphy or telephony, perhaps, but they communicated as though there were no distance. They seemed to draw the highly evolved souls of Earth up to them mentally, and these cooperated consciously, responding unerringly. It was marvelous to watch the process, or rather processes, as there were many phases of this supervision. They were coming and going all the time. I saw many go out and disappear into the depths, all rejoicing in their work, the uplifting of humanity. The souls were countless, the space immeasurable, yet there was no confusion, it was system idealized, each recognizing his mission and doing it. Truly, it was the Christ principle manifested, for they were laboring for others, not themselves. For my own convenience, I designated this place, the powerhouse of existence, and, even now, I cannot think of anything more appropriate, so we will just let it go at that. Once again I was conscious of being held within that great, self-illuminating, electrified current that had made itself manifest all along the way. Now, it not only held me, but interpenetrated, holding within itself even this great powerhouse, which had so impressed me with its importance, that it seemed there could be nothing greater. I looked with a new interest upon the living fluid within it, saw it spreading itself out before me, going out into the violet gold space, illuminating as it went, lighting up the darkness, even the red darkness, until I could see the faraway earth, small in the distance, and could see souls all along the way, held within its magnetized embrace, could see it touch the earth in the same careful, vibratory way that it had touched my body, an atom of earth. And again I asked myself, what is this invisible, silent ghost-like power that seems to be the living essence in everything? Suddenly it either greatly magnified the earth, or gave me telescopic vision, for I could see the earth plainly, could feel it vibrate and tremble in unison with the powerhouse, in which I stood, and up through this living current I could hear the voices of its people. Overall was a sense of a living connection between this place and the earth, as the darkness slowly obscured the earth and my vision passed out of harmonious vibrations with the electrified essence. While my senses lost sight of its presence, there was something within me that made me know that there was no such thing as passing beyond its influence, as it interpenetrated all things. I still looked down into the blue-gold space without seeing, but the earth had taken on a new interest for me. Those about me had spoken of it as the most important phase of existence, and I wondered how I could have been so blindly indifferent, while the privilege of its existence was upon me. That hitherto obscure phrase, the brotherhood of man, which theory I had often laughed to scorn, prodded me with its importance. There had been something glorious in the recognition and admission of my oneness with God, infinitude, but now I knew that I must also recognize and admit, in the same way, my oneness with mankind, for God has made of one blood all nations of men. And even yet further, was the acknowledgement of my oneness with all living things, animate and inanimate. For the inanimate evolutes into the animate into animals, animals into man, and man into God. The race of men and God is one. Man is as God, and exercises the God prerogative to that which is in the scale below him, and dependent on him. Recognition of, and action in, accordance with this responsibility, would greatly facilitate the problem of existence. Nor is there any sex in soul, the same soul sometimes functions as a male, sometimes as a female in the cycles of reincarnation. Referring to reincarnation, every step I took fastened its reality more firmly on me. It is, to me, the only explanation of the inequalities of life as I saw them all along the way. Reincarnation is the key to evolution, evolution the key to existence in an individualized way. A great new love was in my heart, for the people and the living things of earth. I sorrowed deeply, because of their blindness, which caused most of their unhappiness, and desired to go back and tell them what I had seen and what I knew, that it might alleviate conditions in even the smallest way. A voice interrupted as I meditated.
The first flush of the sun rises, even now, upon the earth.
This, however, did not deter me in my desire to go back. In fact, I gave very little thought as to the meaning of the sentence. The desire to go back was growing, becoming more and more intense, until it seemed as I stood looking far down into the fathomless space, that I could hear the earth calling me. Strange fantasy. With this desire full upon me, I turned to Mian and said, "Mian, I want to go back." He made no answer, but looked at me with a strange triumph in his eyes, saying,
"Come."
Forthwith we moved from the Earth's registration center and went higher up within the same environment, where the influence of the Earth was not felt so intimately. A great soul came forward as I went in, and asked just as though I had told him.
And you would return to earth.
Yes, if by so doing I could accomplish good.
Suppose you could not, would you try regardless of what it might mean to you?
I am not considering myself, I want others to know what I know, it would make life so splendidly different.
Suppose they would not believe you.
I would like to give them the opportunity, whether they would or not.
Did the welfare of the people always interest you?
No.
What has caused this change of sentiment?
Your splendid example, and the process by which I have been shown Earth's necessity.
Would you suffer torture, that another might pass into freedom?
I feel that I would endure anything that would uplift humanity.
All experience that sensation when it is too late,
said the voice sorrowfully, and I was left alone with my newborn desire, which did not change but rather intensified, despite the discouraging remark that had concluded the interview. I felt almost rebellious, as though I would go back anyway, regardless of all opposition or opinions to the contrary, and tell what I knew regardless as to whether people believed it or not. Alone, removed from the direct influence of the earth and the great spirits, I viewed the matter dispassionately from all points, and the more I thought of it, the more enamored I became of the project, and the more determined in its execution, at the same time, fully realizing that there were other forces to be taken into consideration in a cooperative sense, for, in the great scheme of things, there is no independence. All are parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is and God the soul. Alone in that ether electricity, one with the very soul of things, in the intensity of my desire to return to earth with a message of knowledge and love, I lifted my eyes, and, there before me, was a familiar face, the one I had seen in the garden before leaving the earth place. The agony was gone out of the face, and it was radiant with love and promise, at the sight of which, my soul rose up in pleading, and I cried out, "Let it be so, let it be so," and again I was alone with bowed head, the intensity of the desire burning within me, feeling that it was not in vain, for something deep down within me was saying, Christ, too, is going back. Chapter 22, Panorama of Life as Lived on Earth. When I again raised my eyes, vibrating directly before me was a little light, so tiny that, at first, I ignored it, but its persistence and magnetic attraction compelled my attention, which I gave rather reluctantly at first, then eagerly, as it began shaping itself into something. As it vibrated, it would disappear downward, only to reappear larger and brighter than before. What was the meaning of it? Then it appeared several times, illuminating different human faces, alternating male and female. It was not unlike a moving picture. Now it seemed to stand still before me, larger and brighter than ever, and more compelling in its attractiveness. As it started vibrating, a small, white, diaphanous, globe-like formation appeared around it, and grew with it. In the growing, it was no longer a tiny light within a tiny globe, it was a pretty, delicate, baby face that smiled innocently into mine. So tiny and helpless it was, that it appealed to me. Then I was given to know that this bit of humanity represented myself, as I had come into this cycle of earth existence. As I gazed upon it, it merged into a doll-faced, curly-haired, blue-eyed girl, incorporated within which I could still see the little light, bright and radiating, within the globe of white, which was within a shadow of body, that in turn, interpenetrated and grew with the physical. School days came and I heard people saying, "She is the brightest girl in school." Still she grew, as the little light within glowed in harmony, with the great light that interpenetrates all things. At this stage of the metamorphosic process, I realized that it was truly myself, as I recognized the incidents portrayed, as pages from the book of my school days, just as my memory retained them. Yet, I was looking upon this creature dispassionately, just as though it were someone else, and in describing it, I shall do so as if it were. It is so much easier to write in the third person, to say nothing of sparing the reader a whole life history of eyes. We will go back and take up this frail little creature, as she revels in music, the one grand passion, before which all things else seem as nothing. It holds her in bondage to itself, as she grows in the joy and mastery of it. How the little, white fingers, too small to span an octave, subconsciously caught fragments from the choir invisible, and imprisoned them on the piano. At college, the last practice period in the evening was in what was termed the haunted music room, where most of the girls dared not go after nightfall, so demoralizing was the story of the haunt, but there was something about the mystery of it that appealed to this girl and made her prefer it to any of the other rooms, although the piano was the most ill-toned as well as ill-tuned in school. And now, I even saw the ghost of the old music room, standing beside her as she played. After all, there was a ghost, regardless of the fact that she had laughed to scorn the idea. How strange it seemed, to actually see it now after all these years. With the coming of young womanhood, I saw, falling upon her, a mantle which was labeled, self-responsibility. It came upon her suddenly, covering her from head to feet, yet she was as unconscious of its coming, as she was of its potentiality, and went on just as though it had not come. As it spread itself upon her, there appeared before her three roads, one was labeled, good. One evil, and the other, the center, was unlabeled. There were thousands treading the center road, where there were hundreds on the others. There were many more upon the road of good than upon that of evil. These roads were guarded by invisible creatures, according to the indicated propensities of each, who were always calling to those who traveled in the center, in an endeavor to influence them to more determined tendencies. Ever and anon there were paths leading from the center to the outer roads, and from one outer road to the other, showing how easily one can change one's course at will. I saw the girl's feet upon the unmarked road, saw her disappear in the onward moving rush, and heard the voices calling to those who heeded and those who heeded not. When she came before me again, there were two great shadows, twin shadows, as it were, hovering over her. One was labeled ambition, the other selfishness, and, under cover of these shadows, I saw her dreaming, ever dreaming. The mirage was a great singer, the compensation, the homage of the world. I saw her holding to her heart in enchanted fancy, as the only thing worthwhile, the emptiest of all life's coveted cups a fame. With these terrible, dark shadows hovering over her, touching her, her eyes glowed, her heart beat wildly, as she played on and on, sang on and on, ever dreaming of that magical someday, on which she would sing, as only dream singers can. When night came, instead of lifting her fair, girlish face, that the light within might consciously receive the illuminating influence of the greater light, she crept into bed, forgetful of all things except the object of her dreaming, and there was no one to remind her that, by ambition fell the angels. Then slowly, as by absorption, the twin shadows crept within the white globe, staining it and dimming the light within, unconscious of which, she happily dreamed on. That a globe effect was so peculiar, that it is hard to describe, so it can be understood, but I'll do my best. At first, it was somewhat like an ordinary globe around any light, only it was nebulous, but as the bodies, the spiritual and physical, began manifesting and growing, it took on rather an oblong shape, interpenetrating and extending out beyond the bodies, several feet, giving the suggestion of being the illumination from the little light that still remained within the bodies, the life spark, as it were. Colors came and went within it, but they were very unlike these dark, red-hued shadows that insinuated themselves into the whiteness about the head, and spilled downward. Spirits of love and mercy focused their influence upon her, looking with sadness upon the shadows, which the short period of self-responsibility had fastened upon her. Spirits of another kind came, and smilingly whispered their approbation and encouragement, as her the Spanish castles grew to mighty proportions. At last, school days were over, and I saw a proud, self-centered woman at a health resort, laughing, dancing and singing, with a heart as light and carefree as that of a bird. The world was good to her. She sang on, dreamed on, holding to her heart a passionate prayer to the gods of destiny. In the next scene, she was sitting with a magazine on her lap, idly turning the pages, her thoughts far away, tangled in the meshes of illusion, delirious with its soft caresses. Great souls of the invisible world stood beside her, consulting as to her welfare, looking sadly upon the shadow-stained globe, but noting with satisfaction the pure whiteness where the shadows were not. Other spirits nearby were listening curiously, some joyously, some sadly, all realizing the seriousness of the consultation, except the one most vitally concerned. After some discussion and earnest deliberation, one of the great souls said, with finality,
"Take away the cause of the shadows, it is the only way."
Then, the great spirits went away sorrowfully, leaving her at least one more day of joy in her castle on the sands, before the tide would come and wash it away. Something of what had transpired sifted into her consciousness, as she became restless and depressed, blue without knowing why. Apprehensive forebodings, indefinable but insistent, obtruded themselves upon her, so forcibly, that she laid the magazine down, arose, shook it all off and went singing to her room, where she arrayed herself in her most beautiful and becoming gown, and went to a rehearsal of a society amateur theatrical, to sing her swan song, the encores of which she held to her heart, as an advance consignment of the world's homage. After the dancing began, a theatrical man made the world her very own, by saying,
"The world will hear of your singing someday. I feel that I have made a find."
"Thank you," I heard her say, smiling serenely, regardless of the riotous triumph within.
"Would you accept an engagement?"
She looked at him in surprise, and shrank away. Her dream had not progressed to that materialistic stage, the magical as someday, was hid somewhere behind an alluring veil, far away in the dim future, with many days to dwell in dreamland before its coming. Accordingly, she made answer almost indifferently. "Not just yet, someday, perhaps."
"Mistake. You are making a mistake. There is no practice like stage practice for a stage career,"
he hastily admonished. "Perhaps," I heard her say, as she gave him her permanent address, before whirling away in a waltz, delirious with triumph. She danced until the hours were small and went home and sat for a long time, dreaming the old dreams in a higher key, and then slept as only the carefree can. How vividly I recalled every incident, as I saw it reenacted in this ethereal realm, far away from the earth, but it was hard to recognize this passionate, fame-mad creature as myself. It had been so long since I had enjoyed such rapturous madness, that it seemed to have been in some former incarnation, instead of only a few short years before. All the details of this living picture I shall not inflict upon the reader, but, in this review of my earth life, even the most trivial incident was not omitted. Its faithfulness to detail was perfectly marvelous. Nothing was hidden, nothing slurred over. It was all there. I was standing face to face with my earth life just as I had lived it, awaiting its condemnation or justification. In writing this, however, I am confining myself to the most important incidents, or main thread, which is sufficient to show the interest and influence of the invisible world on our earth lives individually, showing that while they respect the law of self-responsibility, they interfere when it is used, or abused, to the detriment of the soul, and operate or cooperate according to the law of soul progression. It is the exercise of this prerogative that sometimes changes the most joyous life into a living death, from a mundane viewpoint, but fortunately the mundane is not the only viewpoint. If one cannot, or will not, grow strong spiritually, and be happy at the same time, happiness is removed, that the soul may have its exercise on the dumbbells of misery, and thereby grow strong, as spiritual strength is the only thing worthwhile that we can take with us, when we cross over the borderland. There was a marked interval between the showing of the happy, triumphant girl and the sick woman who lay on a bed of agony the next morning. She was ill, very ill, with a cold, or hoarseness that grew so alarmingly worse, that a physician came and diagnosed laryngitis. Without realizing the seriousness of it, she wondered how she had caught such a cold, and felt it would be entirely dissipated within a few days. But when another day gave place to another, and yet another, she knew different. She realized that she was very ill, down in the valley of the shadow. Breathing became so difficult that every effort, artificial and otherwise, was made to facilitate it. I could see the shadow's body within, struggling to free itself, to pass beyond its bondage, which it seemed to realize would thereafter be a bondage indeed, a veritable prison house of expiation. So desperate became these struggles, that I heard those near saying, "She is dying harder than anyone I ever saw." Standing beside her through it all, was the Great Spirit whom I had heard say, "Take away the cause of the shadows," and he touched her troubled soul, speaking to it, spirit to spirit, and it struggled no longer, but settled down in the resignation that comes only of such communion. Those watching about her thought the transition had come, but instead she opened her eyes calmly to physical perceptions, then slept easily, peacefully, while the Great Spirit remained, comforting her troubled soul, which had not altogether relinquished its desire to escape from its imprisonment of flesh, while the bars of resistance were down. Hours after, she was lying wearily on the bed, awake, with the light gone out of her eyes and a great fear gripping her heart. When she would have taken comfort in the embraces of the old dream, she found something cold and lifeless about it, an utter lack of responsiveness. It was then she turned to the doctor and whispered in a hoarse, croaking way, "My voice, will it come back?"
In time, yes.
He made answer professionally, but she persisted. "I mean, to sing?" She saw the sentence in his eyes, before his lips pronounced it.
Possibly.
There was something, not the doctor, that told her the truth. She knew and turned her face to the wall, with her heart crying out, let me die," and later, in a half-conscious way, with her face still to the wall and her eyes closed, she was murmuring over and over again, "My soul is dead, my soul is dead." There came another pause in this strange moving picture, the space was blank, and then I saw her taking up the burden of life in all its emptiness. Life and singing had been, to her, synonymous, and now there was only life, the casket with the jewel gone. She despised life, it had become a great, empty waste and meant nothing to her. In the bitterness of it all she cried out, "There is no God," and a covering of materialism began weaving about the globe, which, still shadow-stained, enveloped her. The same Great Spirit looked on sorrowfully, respecting the law of self-responsibility and refrained from interference, yet was ever present with his protecting influence. Then I saw her parents, one after the other, pass into the spirit world and she was alone, fighting that bitter fight, hating life, yet living. She felt that she was alone in the world, but she was not. The same Great Spirit was with her always, and when life's pitfalls yawned across her pathway, his hand ever held hers, lifting her safely over, preserving the white spotlessness of the globe, where it had not been touched with the shadows, which were growing dimmer and dimmer as the tragedies of life went on. Then her heart was touched, by something that had never come to it, even in dreams, as ambition admitted no rivals. At last she knew the meaning of love, the splendor of which was so absorbing, she felt it compensated for all that had been taken away, it was to her the land of beginning again, and life seemed to start all over, with new promises, new ideals, such as ambition could never satisfy. The Great Spirit smiled, as though well pleased, as he looked upon her new dream, but he did not leave her. He remained, helping her soul to grow yet stronger and teaching many lessons, as though there was an object in view. She was not conscious of his presence, and he seemed well content to have it so, seeming to know that, when the time came for him to be recognized, the way would be paved for her responsiveness. Then came that well-remembered train scene. I saw her sitting there in perplexity, listening, wondering, while the Great Spirit was beside her. He had spoken and she had heard. Then he took her hand and she was conscious of his presence, it was Mian. Then came the death scene, a scene of that very night, bringing Earth existence down to the very end of its pilgrimage. Naturally, regarding this as the end, I would have turned away, but something compulsory in its strength held me. I looked about, half expecting to see something, but, to all appearances, I was still alone. Perhaps it was the shadow of Earth's spiritual deafness and blindness that made me unable to see. Then I looked back where I had seen the pictures, and was standing face to face with myself as a spirit. I looked at it and it looked at me. When this airy, fairy shadow form came and lay down at my feet, in the attitude of restful relaxation, I was woefully perturbed. A moment later, quivering before my eyes, was that same little light, larger and more illuminated, clothed with its wonderful globe radiance, from which all the shadows were gone. It was glowing in unison with that same great living light essence, in which it was incorporated, which interpenetrated everything. Then I looked down at the shadow of body, the light was gone out of it. Was it possible, could it be dead? Being transparent, it seemed that I could see the deadness all through it, and I shuddered, as I lifted my eyes again to the light that had deserted. It was still quivering within its wonderful illumination, then it slowly quivered upward and outward beyond the range of my vision. Again I looked upon the dead shadow body and shrank away from it, wondering, what could this mean? Did the shadow body have to pass through the valley of death, just as the physical did? In perplexity I turned away from it all and there stood Mian waiting. I would have told him what I had seen, but he interrupted me evenly.
I know.
But why did you treat me like that, Mian? I demanded.
To build an edifice on the ashes.
He answered impressively. And changed your mind, almost sarcastically.
No.
With a touch of reproach that made me say hastily. Forgive me, Mian. What I saw made me live it all over again, the bitterness and the agony of it. But it does not matter now and I thank you for your interest.
Now that you understand better the relationship of the earth plane, and the lives after it, is it your desire to remain here, or to return?
Return to earth, I replied unhesitatingly, rejoicing in this privilege, which I felt would be mine, yet, admitting that it was more than my worthiness justified.
That is well.
He said, as joined by many great souls who rejoiced with us, we descended into the environment which I had designated, the powerhouse, and stood waiting.
Come, tarry not, lest the gates of earth close against you.
He admonished.
Are you ready?
I knew he meant the deterioration of the body, and replied quickly, I am, as I thought of what a catastrophe it would be, if after all, I returned to find the brand of death already upon my physical abode. While I waited for Mian to lead the way, to go as we had come in, the floor seemed to give way, and we went down with the sensation of falling through space.